Hey all, I'm going to be talking about sexual violence in this one, so tune out if that's not something you can handle at present. Eurydice Dixon. This is a shitty story to say the least. It is also an important one to consider though, because Dixon was raped and murdered less than 2 weeks before the time of recording, and her case has helped to highlight a need for a better response to violence against women from us all, but especially men. The rough timeline of events is ostensibly as follows, for those who haven't heard the story already. It was on Tuesday the 12th of June 2018 when Dixon finished a comedy gig at a Melbourne bar, had a drink or two and headed home. Her route took her through Princess Park. Just before midnight, Dixon sent a text to her partner saying that she was almost home safe. Dixon was soon after then attacked, her body found by a passerby at 3 a.m. A 19-year-old man was arrested in relation to the crime on Wednesday night after handing himself in to police. This was an action taken after police circulated footage of a person of interest. 5 days after the murder, Sunday the 17th, a memorial in Princess Park devoted to Dixon was vandalised and a sexual image was painted on the ground pointing at the memorial. Now the vandalism thankfully was swiftly cleaned up and vigils that Monday night attracted some 15,000 attendees, which was of course quite a thing. Along the way though, certain narratives gained some steam, with political leaders weighing in, alongside the Twitter sphere. In there, of course, was the infamous hashtag yesallmen, and of course, along with this came the frequent reminders that not all men are perpetrators of such crimes and that men can be victims too. As is common in these climates, we were also treated to a host of well-intentioned safety tips for women that had the effect of again placing responsibility upon the victims for their own safety. These actions were then met with some pretty resounding condemnations. And now here we are, talking about violence against women in our society and our response to it. Let's make one thing abundantly clear before going on. This is a gendered issue, and the data at present says so. Data on sexual crimes is very difficult to get right, underreporting is rife, arrest records are skewed by biases, etc. But the data nonetheless currently agrees with the assertion that women are most often the victims of sexual assault, and men most often the perpetrators, and in a big way. I'll use data from the American CDC to make that case in the example of the West. NISVS data shows that about 93% of reported sexual violence victims are female. The same source also reports that attackers of women were males 98% of the time. The same source also reports that male victims were most often attacked by other males. Other studies, also from the CDC, do contradict this one point, but the central conclusion isn't changed by this. Sexual violence is most often perpetrated by men upon women in Western society, and to a really high extent. Now, this understanding, of course, in no way reduces the impact upon or validity of male victims, nor the sinister nature of female perpetrators. Examples that minimise this reality do exist. I'm aware of that. For instance, my own state government produced literature that specifically gendered the label victims in domestic violence as female and the label perpetrators as male. That was just so not helpful. But pointing out the gendered nature of sexual violence is not an example of this type of minimisation. It is simply an acknowledgement of a fact that says nothing about male victims or female perpetrators. Now, my prediction is that some will feel that it is minimising regardless. If anyone does feel that way, I invite you to explain how. Anyway, as I said, what we do have is a gendered issue, which forms part of why folks get so mad about what I'll call the stay safe response. It is fair to ask, why should women be the focus here? Women should be able to walk safely in public wherever and whenever they choose, and the focus should be on the perpetrators. The response from the other side of the aisle to this is of course some variant on, say, we get that it's not fair, but you have to do it anyway, it's in your best interests. Yeah, nah though, because that ignores the fact that women have been hearing this narrative for fucking ages now. Surely we can agree that at this point every woman is aware of those stay safe messages, nearly always employs them, and have indeed been creative at coming up with their own ways to stay safe for a long old while as well. Women understand that even if it is unfair, they still should and therefore do employ safety strategies. In spite of these efforts from women though, attacks from men continue to happen, and at this point all that's left for women to do is basically stay inside always, and I don't think anyone is really suggesting that. Women don't need to hear more of this, and so the focus needs to shift away from them. Perhaps more importantly on this point though is the understanding that this stay safe narrative, along with extreme measures like staying home by the way, also ignores that none of this speaks to the fact that most victimised women know their attackers. In a parallel, how common is intimate partner violence? Not much if any of the stay safe advice can speak to these scenarios. Having your phone out while walking at night, staying with a group or male friend does nothing to protect you if, say, said male friend becomes your attacker, or you're being attacked in your own home. Eurydice's case of being attacked and killed in public is the far rarer example when it comes to violence against women. On a few fronts then, the stay safe response, especially in lieu of other efforts to curb the issue, is pretty much unnecessary and frankly insulting to boot. So what to do then? Well, what is missing from the picture at this point is a robust analysis of the reasons why men commit these crimes so much more often than women, and what responses we can have to the situation that might curb this behaviour. We do have some idea of these reasons behind this behaviour. The White Ribbon organisation points out that where women have more equality, violence against women decreases, implying that equality is a key here. It also points out that gender inequality itself stems from perceptions of gender roles, implying further that diminishing ideas around these roles will help. Now, we may have lost some folks at this point because this fits well within a third-wave feminist argument, but for those still here, this raises the important question of how do we go about diminishing said gender roles? Of course, that's not easy, but again, there are some ideas about ways in which these gender roles and stereotypes may be addressed, including calling out poor behaviour, reductions of negative portrayals of women in media, and not electing men who brag about assaulting women to the office of POTUS. Despite this understanding though, I do think that overall we have some way to go from having anything like a complete and quantifiable picture of the reasons why these crimes happen, and what our response to them should be. Ultimately, the total picture of response needs to be developed after a long discussion and serious investigation, and that's a response that is likely to be continuously changing as we develop better understandings. The previous examples are likely to help, for instance, but we won't know how much until down the road. This, though, leads me to what I think is the one very salient point here. To have this discussion, we need to get rid of the major barriers to it, and at present, the main barrier is, I think, men. Women on the whole understand their role in this. This isn't about them now, but the response from men, and some women too, is far too often to take the stance that since they don't perpetrate, or perhaps even feel that their social circle of men wouldn't either, that they have no role to play. And the thing is, that's bullshit. Every single one of us cis-hets has a responsibility to acknowledge the problem, which is literally the least we can do. We also have a responsibility to not hold up efforts to explore the problem as the next least thing to do. Far better, of course, would be accepting our responsibility to contribute to efforts to change, and be willing to assess our picture of masculinity and rout out any, I'm going to say it, toxic elements. End of the day, men are usually the perpetrators in cases of sexual violence. Women are usually the victims. Our society's historical responses to this have been to grab some low-hanging fruit by way of law and order and improved equality up to a point, and it's been effective to an extent. We're at least doing much better than other societies, but there's still a ways to go. Some of the responses to the continued problem are not helpful, and what is too often missing from this is a critique of the values and attitudes that lead to the situation being as it is. The fact that at least some people feel it's called for, even if socially not acceptable, to vandalise a victim's memorial in such a way points to that fact. While we all have a part to play in developing and perpetuating this critique, what has often been in turn lacking from the discussion is, as I've said, men. All men need to be willing to reflect on the causes of sexual violence, something not all men are willing to do. All men need to be willing to engage in activities that counter unhealthy values, like calling out mates for shitty behaviour, or more importantly, working against gender roles generally. Again, far too many men are not, and it is for these reasons that we say yes, all men. Thanks for watching. Thoughts, comments and criticisms from the well-intentioned welcome. Talk at yous next time.